When the eviction crew opened that freezer on a Tuesday morning in March, they expected to find frozen meals, maybe some forgotten leftovers. What they found instead were two small bodies, wrapped carefully in plastic bags, frozen in time. A 13-year-old girl, a 9-year-old boy, both perfectly preserved, like they were sleeping. But they weren't sleeping. They had been dead for years. And their mother? She had been living with them the entire time, walking past that freezer every single day, keeping her darkest secret locked away in plain sight. For years, neighbors said Sarah Mitchell was quiet, kept to herself, seemed like she was doing her best as a single mother. Behind her locked doors, in an ordinary apartment building in Detroit, was a secret so horrifying that when the truth finally came out, it would shake an entire community to its core. This is not a story about a monster. This is a story about something far more terrifying, because Sarah Mitchell looked just like anyone else. She smiled at neighbors. She posted about her children on social media. She called herself blessed to be a mom. And all the while, two of her children lay frozen in her living room, their bodies hidden from the world, their voices silenced forever. How does a mother do this? How does someone live with that kind of secret? And what finally brought the truth into the light? This is the story of the Freezer Mom case, and I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. Before we go deeper into this case, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Trust me, you'll want to follow this story all the way through, because the truth is darker than you can imagine. Sarah Mitchell was 35 years old when police arrested her in March of that year. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to when she was just another struggling single mother trying to make ends meet in one of Detroit's toughest neighborhoods. Sarah had 4 children, 4 beautiful kids who depended on her for everything. Their father wasn't in the picture. Sarah was all they had, and by all accounts, at least in the beginning, she tried. She worked multiple jobs. She kept a roof over their heads. She posted pictures on Facebook of birthday parties and school events. One post read, "There is no greater blessing than being called mom." Friends from her past remember her as someone who could be sweet, even funny. But they also remember something else, a distance, a coldness that seemed to grow over time. Sarah's apartment was in the Martin Luther King Apartments on the east side of Detroit, a place where poverty was visible on every corner, where people minded their own business because everyone had their own struggles. The building itself was run down, paint peeling from the walls, hallways that smelled like mildew and old cooking oil. Sarah's unit was on the second floor, a cramped 2-bedroom space that barely fit a family of 5. The living room was cluttered with furniture that had seen better days, and in the corner, pushed against the wall, sat a white deep freezer. To anyone who visited, it looked like any other appliance, just a freezer, nothing unusual, nothing to question. But inside Sarah Mitchell's home, behind the closed doors and drawn curtains, something terrible was happening. Her oldest daughter, Emily, would later describe a childhood filled with fear. Sarah wasn't just strict. She was violent, unpredictable. One moment she could be calm, almost normal. The next she would explode over the smallest thing. A spilled drink, a wrong answer, a look she didn't like. Emily said her mother was like a ticking time bomb. You never knew what would set her off. The punishments grew worse as the children got older. There was a phase where Sarah used an extension cord, then a belt buckle, then worse. Burns from a curling iron, beatings with wooden planks. The children learned quickly to stay quiet, to not make waves, to survive. And then there was the youngest boy, Kevin. He was small for his age, quiet, always trying to disappear into the background. Sarah seemed to focus on him in a different way, asking him questions over and over, pressing him about his older siblings. Did they hurt you? Did they touch you? Tell me the truth. Kevin would shake his head, scared, confused. No, Mom, they didn't do anything, but Sarah wouldn't accept it. She would ask again, and again. Her voice getting louder, her eyes getting wider, until Kevin didn't know what was real anymore. Emily watched this happen. She knew where it was heading, and she was terrified. Neighbors in the building noticed things, but not enough to connect the dots. They saw Sarah sometimes coming and going with plastic bags of groceries. They saw her children less and less. When asked, Sarah always had an explanation. "Oh, they're with their grandmother. They're at camp. They're staying with family." The neighbors nodded and went about their business. In a place like this, you didn't ask too many questions. You didn't get involved. But some of them noticed the curtains were always drawn. Some of them noticed Sarah looked tired, worn down, like she was carrying a weight no one could see. And some of them noticed the smell. Not always, but sometimes, when you walked past her door, there was something in the air. Something off. Something that made you walk a little faster. Let me tell you about the children. Because they weren't just victims in a case file. They were real kids with personalities, with dreams, with lives that mattered. Michael was 9 years old. He loved video games, the kind where you could build worlds and go on adventures. He was small for his age, with a shy smile that made adults want to protect him. Teachers at his school said he was quiet but smart, always trying to do the right thing. He had this habit of biting his nails when he was nervous, and he was nervous a lot. Home wasn't a safe place for Michael. He learned early to read his mother's moods, to stay out of her way when she was angry. But no matter how careful he was, it was never enough. Then there was Lisa, 13 years old, on the edge of becoming a teenager, but still holding on to pieces of childhood. She liked music, wanted to learn how to dance, talked about being on television someday. She had her mother's eyes, dark and intense, and a stubborn streak that got her into trouble. Lisa was protective of her younger siblings, especially Michael. She would take punishments meant for them, step in front of them when Sarah's anger was rising. Emily would later say that Lisa tried to be brave, tried to hold the family together even when everything was falling apart. But bravery can only take you so far when you're 13 years old and the person who's supposed to protect you is the one hurting you the most. Emily, the oldest, was 17. She had already started planning her escape, counting down the days until she could leave. But leaving meant abandoning her siblings, and that guilt ate at her. She tried to shield them when she could, but Sarah's rage was unpredictable, and sometimes Emily was a target too. Burns on her arms from a curling iron, bruises on her back from being hit with a plank of wood. She wore long sleeves even in summer, kept her head down at school, lied when teachers asked if everything was okay at home. And Kevin, the youngest, just 6 years old, didn't fully understand what was happening. He knew to stay quiet. He knew to say what Mom wanted him to say. He knew that home was a place where you held your breath and hoped for the best. This was the family behind closed doors. This was the reality that no one outside could see. And it was about to get so much worse. It was late August when everything changed for Michael. Sarah had been questioning Kevin again, asking him over and over if his older brother had done something to him, something inappropriate, something terrible. Kevin kept saying no. He didn't understand what his mother wanted him to say. But Sarah wouldn't stop. Her questions became accusations. Her voice became sharper. "Tell me the truth, Kevin. Tell me what he did to you." And finally, terrified and desperate to make it stop, Kevin said yes. He didn't know what yes meant. He didn't know what would happen next. He just wanted his mother to stop yelling. Sarah's face changed. Something cold and hard settled over her features. She called Michael into the room. He came, nervous, not knowing what he'd done wrong this time. Sarah started screaming at him, calling him names I won't repeat here, accusing him of unspeakable things. Michael tried to defend himself. "Mom, no, I didn't do anything, I swear." But Sarah wasn't listening. She grabbed an extension cord from the closet. Emily, watching from the doorway, felt her stomach drop. She knew what was coming. The beating lasted hours. Sarah hit Michael over and over, on his back, his legs, his arms. She used the cord until it broke, then switched to her fists, then to whatever was within reach. Michael was crying, begging her to stop. "Please, Mom, please, I didn't do it." but Sarah was beyond reason. When Michael started vomiting, Sarah paused. The boy collapsed on the floor, his small body shaking. He couldn't urinate. His heartbeat was faint. Emily wanted to call for help, wanted to do something, but she was frozen with fear. Sarah stood over Michael, breathing hard, and for a moment it looked like she might call an ambulance. But then Kevin, scared out of his mind, whispered, "Please, don't call anyone, Mom." And Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She didn't call for help. She watched as Michael's breathing slowed. She watched as the light faded from his eyes. And when he was gone, when it was too late to save him, she wrapped his body in a blanket and carried him to the freezer in the living room. Emily was ordered to help, 17 years old, terrified, and now an accomplice to something unthinkable. Together, they lifted Michael's small body and placed it inside the freezer. Sarah closed the lid, locked it, and then she turned to her remaining children and said, "If anyone asks, Michael is staying with relatives. Do you understand?" They nodded. What else could they do? That night, Emily lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, knowing that just below her, in the living room, her little brother was inside a freezer. The apartment fell into a strange, suffocating silence. Sarah acted like nothing had happened. She cooked meals. She watched television. She walked past the freezer a dozen times a day like it was just another piece of furniture. But for Emily and Kevin, every day became a nightmare. They had to walk past that freezer to get to the kitchen, to get to the living room, to do anything. Emily would later say, "I made sure to watch what I said around my mother. I already knew that one misstep, and this is where I'd end up." She lived in constant fear that she would be next. That one wrong word, one wrong look, and she'd join Michael in that freezer. Sarah became more paranoid after Michael's death. She drilled into her children's heads what to say if anyone asked. "Where's your brother? He's staying with family. Why haven't we seen him? He's just away for a while." The lies had to be perfect. Any slip-up could mean the end. 9 months passed. 9 months of living with that secret, of walking past that freezer, of pretending everything was normal. And then Sarah's attention turned to Lisa. It started the same way it had with Michael. Sarah questioned Kevin again, this time about his older sister. "Did Lisa do something to you? Did she hurt you?" Kevin had learned his lesson. He knew what happened when he said no. So when Sarah's voice got that edge, when her eyes got that look, Kevin said yes. He said what she wanted to hear. And just like before, Sarah's rage ignited. Lisa became Sarah's target. But this time Sarah didn't lose control in a moment of anger. This time, it was calculated, deliberate. She started starving Lisa, feeding her only a small bowl of oatmeal once a day. Lisa grew thin, her eyes hollow, her movements slow. Sarah beat her regularly, punches to the face, kicks to the body, beatings with a wooden 2x4 that left bruises in the shape of its edges. Emily watched helplessly as her sister withered away. She wanted to intervene, wanted to protect Lisa the way Lisa had always protected her. But she knew it was useless. Trying to stop Sarah would only make things worse, would only put herself in danger. One day, Sarah filled a pot with boiling water. She called Lisa into the bathroom, made her get into the tub, and then poured the scalding water over her. Lisa screamed, her skin blistering, but Sarah didn't stop. She strangled Lisa with a t-shirt, pulling it tight around her neck until Lisa's face turned red, then purple. And when that wasn't enough, Sarah grabbed a plastic grocery bag and placed it over Lisa's head. She held it there as Lisa struggled, as her movements became weaker, as her body finally went still. May 25th. A 13-year-old girl died in that bathtub while her mother watched. Sarah ordered Emily to help her move the body. Together they carried Lisa down to the living room, opened the freezer, and placed her on top of Michael. 2 children now. 2 bodies in a freezer in the middle of the living room. Sarah closed the lid and locked it again. And then life went on. Neighbors still saw Sarah coming and going. They still heard her television through the walls. They had no idea that just inside her apartment, In a freezer that looked completely ordinary were the remains of 2 children who had been tortured and killed by their own mother. Emily and Kevin lived in that apartment for 3 more years. 3 years of walking past that freezer, 3 years of keeping that terrible secret. Emily would later say she felt like she was living in a horror movie, except there was no escape, no credits rolling, no moment when she could wake up and realize it was all just a nightmare. This was real. This was her life, and the only thing she could do was survive. March 24th. A Tuesday morning that started like any other for the eviction crew from the 36th District Court. Sarah Mitchell owed over $2,000 in unpaid rent. Multiple notices had been sent, multiple warnings given. Now it was time to remove her belongings and secure the property. When the crew arrived at the Martin Luther King Apartments, Sarah wasn't home. They knocked on the door. No answer. They unlocked it using the master key provided by the building management and stepped inside. The smell hit them immediately. Something rotten, something wrong. The apartment was cluttered, trash piled in corners, dishes stacked in the sink. But they had seen worse. They started removing furniture, working methodically through the rooms. Then they got to the living room. The white deep freezer sat against the wall, its cord plugged into an outlet, humming quietly. One of the crew members grabbed the handle to move it. Locked. That was unusual. Why would someone lock a freezer? He found the key nearby, on top of the unit, and unlocked it. When he lifted the lid, he froze. Inside, wrapped in a large plastic bag, was what looked like a human body. A girl, a teenager. Her skin was gray, frozen, her features preserved by the cold. The crew member stumbled backward, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. He yelled for his partner. They looked inside the freezer again, and that's when they saw the second body underneath the first. A boy, smaller, younger, both of them frozen solid. The crew immediately called 911. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances surrounded the building. Officers entered the apartment, confirmed what the crew had found, and began securing the scene. Neighbors came out into the hallways, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. Word spread quickly. Bodies, children, in a freezer, in Sarah Mitchell's apartment. The authorities contacted the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, and detectives were dispatched to the scene. They photographed everything, documented every detail, and then they carefully removed the freezer, with the bodies still inside, and transported it to the medical examiner's office. The bodies were thawed naturally over the course of 3 days. Only then could the medical examiner begin the autopsies. What they found was horrifying. The girl was approximately 13 years old. The boy was approximately 9. Both had suffered extensive injuries before their deaths, blunt force trauma, burns, evidence of prolonged abuse. The exact time of death couldn't be determined due to the freezing, but based on the level of preservation and the condition of the bodies, the medical examiner estimated they had been in that freezer for years. 2 children, dead for years, hidden in plain sight. And now the question became, where was their mother? Police found Sarah Mitchell at a friend's house a few blocks away. When they knocked on the door and identified themselves, she came outside calmly, almost like she had been expecting them. Officers asked her to come down to the station for questioning. She agreed without resistance. In the interrogation room, Sarah sat across from detectives and answered their questions with an eerie calmness. They asked her about the bodies in the freezer. Sarah didn't deny it. She admitted that they were her children, Michael and Lisa. She admitted that she had killed them. She admitted that she had kept their bodies in the freezer for years, but she showed no remorse. None. When detectives asked her how she could do such a thing, Sarah looked at them with cold eyes and said, "They were demons. I don't feel any remorse for the death of demons." The detectives were stunned. In all their years of working homicide cases, they had never encountered someone so devoid of emotion, so completely disconnected from the reality of what they had done. Sarah went on to describe in graphic detail how she had killed each child. She described the beatings, the starvation, the torture. She described wrapping their bodies and placing them in the freezer, and she did it all without shedding a single tear. One detective would later say, "I felt that there was something broken in that person. Not just broken, missing, like the part of her that was supposed to feel guilt or love or anything human was just gone." Sarah was arrested and charged with 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of premeditated murder, and 1 count of torture. She was also charged with child abuse for what she had done to Emily and Kevin, the 2 surviving children who were immediately placed in protective custody. The news of the arrests hit the media like a bomb. Headlines screamed, "Freezer Mom, House of Horrors, Children Found in Freezer." The story went national. People across the country watched in disbelief as details of the case emerged. How could a mother do this? How could someone live with 2 dead children in their home for years? The questions came from everywhere, but there were no satisfying answers. Emily and Kevin were taken to a safe location and provided with counseling. Emily spoke to investigators, telling them everything she had witnessed, everything she had been forced to endure. Her testimony was critical in building the case against Sarah. Kevin, still so young, struggled to understand what had happened. He had been manipulated, used as a pawn in his mother's twisted justifications for murder. Both children would carry the trauma of those years for the rest of their lives. In June, Sarah Mitchell appeared in Wayne County Circuit Court before Judge Dana Hathaway. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and people who just needed to see the woman who had committed these unthinkable crimes. Sarah stood before the judge, her expression blank, her posture relaxed. Judge Hathaway asked her how she pleaded to the charges. Sarah pleaded guilty. No trial, no lengthy legal battle, just a simple admission of guilt. And then, in open court, she described in horrifying detail exactly what she had done to her children. She talked about beating Michael to death, about watching him die, about putting his body in the freezer. She talked about torturing Lisa for months, about starving her, burning her, strangling her, suffocating her. And then she said something that shocked everyone in the courtroom. She said that killing Michael was an accident, but killing Lisa was intentional. She had meant to do it. She had wanted Lisa dead. When asked why, Sarah's answer was chilling. Because she deserved it. They both did. They were demons, and I did what needed to be done. The courtroom fell silent. Even the most hardened prosecutors and defense attorneys were shaken by her words. This wasn't a woman consumed by guilt or grief. This was someone who genuinely believed she had done the right thing. Judge Hathaway listened to all of it, her face a mask of controlled emotion. When Sarah finished speaking, the judge looked at her and said, "You created a house of horrors for your children. They lived in terrible fear of you. You imposed the death penalty on your own children. As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities was to protect your kids, and you failed in the most horrific way possible." The judge sentenced Sarah Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No chance of freedom, no chance of redemption. Sarah showed no reaction. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and that was the last time the public saw her face. The other charges, including torture and child abuse, were dismissed because the murder charges already carried the maximum penalty. The prosecutor's office stated that there was no point in pursuing lesser charges when Sarah was already facing life without parole. Justice, at least in the legal sense, had been served. But for Emily and Kevin, for the community, for everyone who had followed this case, justice felt hollow. Because no sentence could bring Michael and Lisa back. No punishment could undo the years of torture those children endured, and no amount of time behind bars could make sense of what Sarah had done. So let me ask you something. What do you think really happened inside Sarah Mitchell? Was she evil from the start, or did something break along the way? Mental health experts who reviewed the case suggested that Sarah may have suffered from untreated postpartum psychosis, depression, or other severe mental illnesses. Records showed that Child Protective Services had been called to her home multiple times over the years, in 2002 and 2005, but each time Sarah was allowed to keep custody of her children. The system failed Michael and Lisa long before their mother killed them. But does that excuse what she did? Does mental illness justify torture and murder? Emily Mitchell, now an adult, has spoken publicly about her experience. She has said that she still has nightmares about that freezer, about walking past it every day, knowing her siblings were inside. She has said that she struggles with guilt, wondering if there was something more she could have done, some way she could have saved them. Therapists have told her it wasn't her fault, that she was a child herself, a victim of the same abuse. But guilt doesn't listen to logic. Kevin, now older, has remained out of the public eye, trying to build a life away from the shadow of what happened. Both of them carry scars, visible and invisible, that will never fully heal. The neighborhood where it happened has moved on, at least on the surface. The Martin Luther King apartments still stand, though the unit where Sarah lived has been renovated and rented to new tenants. The freezer was destroyed as evidence after the trial, but people who lived there at the time still remember. They remember the police lights, the news vans, the realization that something unspeakable had been happening right next door. Some of them feel guilty for not noticing sooner, for not asking more questions, for not doing more. But how could they have known? Sarah was careful. She was secretive. She presented a version of herself to the world that seemed normal enough, and behind that facade was a monster. What would drive a mother to keep the dead close instead of letting them go? What kind of mind justifies keeping your children's bodies in a freezer for years, walking past them every single day, living your life like nothing was wrong? Psychologists have debated this. Some say it was a form of denial, that Sarah couldn't face what she had done, so she kept the bodies close as a way of pretending they were still somehow with her. Others say it was control, that even in death she wanted to dominate them, to keep them under her power. And some say it was fear, that she knew the moment she got rid of the bodies, the truth would come out, and her life as she knew it would be over. Maybe it was all of those things. Maybe it was none of them. Maybe the truth is that we will never fully understand what goes on in the mind of someone capable of such evil. As I close this story, I want you to think about something. How many Sarah Mitchells are out there right now, living in apartments and houses just like yours and mine, hiding secrets behind closed doors? How many children are suffering in silence, too afraid to speak up, too trapped to escape? This case isn't just about one woman and two dead children. It's about the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable. It's about the neighbors who see signs but don't act. It's about the culture of silence that allows abuse to flourish in the shadows. Michael and Lisa deserved better. They deserved a mother who loved them. They deserved a childhood free from fear and pain. They deserved to grow up, to go to school, to have friends, to experience life. Instead, they got a monster, and now they're gone. So let me ask you, what do you think really happened that night Michael died? Was Sarah a victim of her own broken mind, or was she fully aware of what she was doing? Was justice really served with a life sentence, or should the penalty have been even harsher? I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. How do you feel about this case? How do you feel about Sarah Mitchell? Could you imagine living with a secret like that, or would it destroy you? And if you were Emily, walking past that freezer every day, what would you have done? Could you have survived what she survived? This story shakes you because it's real, because it happened, because somewhere in Detroit, in a freezer in a living room, two children's lives ended and their mother carried on like nothing was wrong. If this case affected you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, then share this video. Let people know that these stories matter, that these victims matter. And if you want to hear more real-life stories that make you question everything, subscribe to this channel. Next time I'll be telling you about the mother who hid her husband's body for 12 years, and trust me, that story is just as twisted. Until then, stay safe, and remember, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look just like everyone else.